Okay. Hello, everyone. I've never tried to make a YouTube video before, so bear with me. I'm sure the editing is going to be a little bit awkward. Welcome to my TED Talk. I'm going to be talking about video games for this assignment. Over the last few days, I've been asking myself the question, why are reactionaries, transphobes, and misogynists so prevalent in video game discourse, specifically on the internet? Since I want to keep this video around 5 minutes, I'm going to assume most of you are aware of what I'm talking about. But if you aren't, it's more or less the oversaturation in online spaces of anti-woke outrage farmers like this man.
Sorry, did you want to get immersed in our world? Yeah, well, guess what? Pronouns! Gender ambiguity! Current day Californian!
As someone who's been playing video games since they were very young, I became curious. What is the relationship between reactionary politics and gaming? Could it be that the hobby itself inherently encourages this sentiment, or is there something outside of video games that has attracted reactionaries into the space and radicalized those already there? In order to provide a tentative answer to this question, I decided to take a look at both the history of video games and the history of hobby culture in America, which leads us to part one, the Great Depression. One thing I was surprised to learn when doing research for this video was that many of the recreational activities we know today, such as birdwatching, stamp making, woodworking, and miniature modeling, emerged out of the Great Depression. Men who lost their jobs during this period were encouraged to adopt hobbies in order to maintain their work ethic and avoid so called degenerate behavior such as drunkenness or communist organizing. Men who felt emasculated by their inability to provide for their family began turning to hobbies as a means of buffering their self worth and exercising mastery of a given skill. In his essay, A Job You Can't Lose, Stephen M. Gelber writes that, quote, hobbies, like work, could be difficult and frustrating, but unlike work, they were free from alienation because no matter how hard hobbyists worked, their hobby work was freely undertaken. It was not what they did, but the spirit in which they did it that differentiated hobbyists from wage slaves. I would like to argue that the phenomenon of hobby culture emerging as a type of opium for the working masses has repeated itself in the emergence and growth of the video game market. But in order to explain how this has facilitated the rise of reactionary politics, we need to take a look at Part 2, Nintendo and Neoliberalism. In her paper on Gamergate and geek masculinity, Andrea Braithwaite, sorry, I'm so sorry, writes that, quote, historically, game companies have imagined an audience filled with young, white, heterosexual males. This becomes evident when seeing the manner in which Nintendo would gender their products as early as the late 80s. However, this trend has held true through the 90s, aughts, and 2010s, with marketing that still consistently caters to traditionally masculine power fantasies and the male gaze. But the 80s did not only bring us Nintendo, it also brought us the neoliberal economic policies of Ronald Reagan. Neoliberalism led to the globalization of markets and the mass exodus of American manufacturing jobs. Companies were incentivized to set up shop in countries with minimal labor protections, allowing workers to be more efficiently exploited for their labor. To quote Jonathan D. Ostry et al. In their article Neoliberalism Oversold, the costs of neoliberalism in terms of increased inequality are prominent. Increased inequality in turn hurts the level and sustainability of growth. Even if growth is the sole or main purpose of the neoliberal agenda, advocates of that agenda still need to pay attention to the distributional effects. Evidence of growing inequality under neoliberalism is also visible in our contracting middle class, which, according to the Pew Research Center, has fallen from 61% in 1971 to 50% in 2021. But what does any of this have to do with video games? Well, I'll tell you in part 3, conclusion. I would like to put forward the theory that the reactionary discourse we see among self identifying gamers is not a product of the hobby of gaming in and of itself. I believe that what we are seeing is actually a repeat of Depression era hobby culture enacted across the last 5 decades. This is to say, men who find themselves alienated at their place of work, dissatisfied with their career, or emasculated by their inability to be providers are increasingly being drawn to the hobby of video games as a means of exercising mastery and affirming their own masculine identity. In a world where most of us are condemned to soul sucking jobs and economic disempowerment, video games serve to provide us proletarians with the means of role playing empowered great men. In turn, this attracts aggrieved men who look to video games as a cathartic means of macho validation. Those men then radicalize younger boys already in the space. This would also explain why these self identifying gamers are so hostile to women and queer people entering their domain. If games are perceived as the last vestige of machismo expression, kind of like model trains in the Depression, It makes sense why these wildly insecure gamers would consider any uptick in diversity to be an existential threat. If a girl can hit prestige in Call of Duty Black Ops 6, then all of a sudden it can no longer be considered by these men evidence of their own masculine prowess. As silly as it sounds, I believe that these men see the very idea of a woman or queer person playing their games as an attack on their safe space. Although in this case, safe space refers to Call of Duty lobbies where white 12-year-olds can call people the N-word.
With the glass ceiling broken, all the oppressed groups shall prosper, especially the most oppressed group of all, gamers.
Thank you all for watching.